Wow. I think we are actually live. Um, and I think that I am audible. And I am going to proceed. I apologize for the delay in getting this video up. We experienced a lot of technical difficulties. And by technical difficulties, I mean that we here at Base Aid find technology difficult to use in this case. I don't think there was anything wrong with the technology. I think we just don't know how to use it. So this is a plea. If anybody watching this knows about YouTube streaming or other streaming services and how to use this technology competently and reliably, please contact us. We are looking for some help and coaching in this department. Uh, uh, as it seems that every time we try to do this, we run into some unforeseen difficulty. So if this is something you know about, please, again, email rabbi@baseabe.com or office@baseabe.com and let us know that this is something you can help with. Not continue to be flailing with the technology. So on that note, let's turn to the task at hand, which is talking about Shemini Atzeret. So the action on Shemini Atzeret, liturgically speaking, at least outside of Israel, where they observe Simchas Torah on the first day of Shemini Atzeret. On the first day of Shemini Atzeret, outside the land of Israel, the big action liturgically is the prayer for rain. This is the day where we start mentioning rain in our Amidah, in our central prayer of our liturgy. And this date, as the day we start mentioning rain, was not always a given. In the very first Mishnah in Tractate Ta'anit, which deals with the laws of fasts, and it begins with a discussion of when do we start mentioning rain in our prayers, since lack of rain was often the reason for fasts. And there's a debate among the rabbis of the Mishnaic period in the 2nd century. Rabbi Eliezer says that we start mentioning rain on the first day of Sukkot. That would have been a week ago. And Rabbi Yehoshua, his intellectual sparring partner, says, no, we start mentioning rain on the last day of Sukkot. And Rabbi Yehoshua bolsters his claim with the argument that why would we mention rain on the first day of Sukkot? Because rain during Sukkot is nothing but a sign of curse. We don't want rain on the holiday when God commands us to go sit in tents and in booths that let through. To get rain on that holiday is a bad sign. It's a curse. And Rabbi Eliezer's response is, I didn't say we ask for rain on the first day. I just said we mention it. And that we ask that God, we mention that God should send the rain at the proper time. Not now, but later. And Rabbi Yoshua's response is, well, if that's the case, we should mention it all year long. If I could mention it in July and say, God, you send the rain in November. I don't want rain in July in Israel. But I want it in November, so I'll mention it in July. And we don't, in fact, do that. We don't mention rain in our prayers all year long. We mention them only during the approximately 6 months of the year when we actually want rain in the land of Israel. And so Rabbi Yehoshua prevails. However, what's interesting is we actually start mentioning rain before we start asking for rain. We start mentioning that God sends the rain on the last day of Sukkot, as Rabbi Yehoshua held. But the same chapter of the Mishnah goes on to tell us that we don't start asking God to send rain. We don't start requesting rain in the blessing where we ask God to send us a prosperous year until Cheshvan, over 2 weeks later, after we've already started mentioning the rain. So even for Rabbi Yoshua, there's a difference between mentioning rain and asking for rain. And that's because, and the reason given for not asking for rain right away is that we want to give the people who were traveling to Jerusalem for the festival time to get home after the festival. So we're giving consideration to the needs of those people who were on the road, even though we're already in a time of year when rain would not be a curse, it would be a blessing. Nonetheless, it would be a blessing that would inconvenience a great number of people. And so we put off asking for rain until it would be an unmitigated blessing in the month of Cheshvan. So there's seemingly a technical debate about when to start saying certain pieces of our liturgy. I think has some important lessons for us. One is that timing can make, and context can make the difference between something being a blessing and the same thing being a curse, or something in between. Rain in the summer months, rain during Sukkot is nothing but a curse. Whereas rain after the end of Sukkot, but when you're still on the road traveling, is maybe a blessing, but an inconvenient one. And then rain in its proper time in the late fall and in the winter, that's an unmitigated blessing. It's the same rain, but timing and context change how we are affected by it. And rain is this strange phenomenon that is essential for supporting life. We couldn't survive on Earth without it, even if now that we're not an primarily agricultural economy, most of us are not directly engaged in activities that remind us of that. But without rain in the proper time, we'd all starve to death. At the same time, for most activities that we want to engage in, and very often rain is an inconvenience, causes discomfort. It stops us from doing the things that we want to do and makes life more difficult. So the other piece that I think this Mishnah highlights is that just because something is a blessing doesn't mean it's always convenient or pleasant. And likewise, just because something's unpleasant and inconvenient for me personally doesn't mean that it's not a blessing for others or for the world at large. We're living through a situation, all of us right now, that in many ways and for many, many people is an unmitigated curse. The COVID-19 pandemic, for those who are suffering from this disease or who've lost loved ones or who've lost jobs and can't pay their bills, this is an unmitigated curse, a siman klala. And for others of us, it's an inconvenience. I still have a job and I can work from home, but life's a little more hectic. If I'm someone who has kids at home that I have to watch while I'm trying to work, maybe I live alone and I'm lonesome, I'm bored, I'm stir crazy. It's an inconvenience. I miss the things that I used to be able to do. I miss going to restaurants. I miss going to movies. And for some of us, and maybe most of us, some of the time, there's some measure of blessing in this. I have more time to spend with family. I have an opportunity to reassess my priorities in life. I'm able to take advantage of how many institutions and organizations are focusing more on making things accessible for people who for whom accessibility has been a challenge already. The pandemic means suddenly all sorts of things that no one bothered making accessible before are now being made accessible to people who can't be somewhere in person. I suspect all of us are experiencing some mix of curse, inconvenience, and actual blessing in the rainstorm that we are experiencing right now, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. And the degree to which this pandemic is an unmitigated curse, or a minor inconvenience, or even in some measure a blessing, if we can say that, I think depends on us and how we respond to it. First of all, the curse is something that we have a great deal of control over. We have a tremendous ability to minimize the curse of this pandemic by taking measures as individuals and as a society to protect ourselves and to protect others, and to slow or even stop the spread of the disease. If we go out as little as possible, if we actually wear our masks whenever we're out in public or around other people, and we use proper social distancing whenever we are interacting with anyone who's outside of our immediate household bubble, not only will we be less likely to get sick, we'll be less likely to spread the disease to others if we do get it. On the other hand, if we refuse to wear masks, if we go out and we sit in restaurants and bars, if we go to parties and other crowded events without masks, without social distancing, we are guaranteeing that this will spread faster to more people and afflict more people and hurt and kill more people. It's in our hands whether this disease, how much of a curse this disease is in our society. If we, on the other hand, if we really take all measures as individuals and as a society to protect those who've lost their livelihoods, and to protect the jobs that are still there without forcing people to endanger their lives by going to work in dangerous situations where they're exposed to COVID, we can reduce the degree to which this is a curse to those who, even to in its economic impact. So the curse of this disease is largely in our hands. What about the inconvenience factor? For those of us who aren't losing our lives to it, haven't gotten sick and hopefully won't, and I haven't lost jobs. For those who are experiencing this as an inconvenience merely, I think that's also somewhat in our hands. The more that I struggle and try to force my life to conform to the way things were before, and fight uphill battles to simulate as much as possible the way life was before COVID, the more inconvenient COVID is for me, and the more problems it causes for me. The more I embrace the changes that this has brought and say, you know what, this is the time for focusing on quality time, myself and with my family, a time to reconnect with people who don't live in the same place that I do, whose correspondence I might have let drop because life was so busy. More I make this a time to take up a new craft or a hobby, or take road trips instead of flying to go travel. I can actually have experiences that are positive that wouldn't have happened had this pandemic not taken place. Not that it's by any stretch that's worth all the lives that have been lost, but I can find these opportunities that have been for blessing within this difficult situation. And I can, by noticing those and taking advantage of them and paying attention to them and acknowledging them, I can actually amplify the blessing that I experience. It's easy to let those little positive things go unnoticed. But if I take the time to give thanks for them and appreciate them, they actually will bring more blessings, because just like if you can eat the same amount of food and without noticing it and get very little pleasure from it, or you can stop and slow down and notice the taste, notice the pleasure, and give thanks for it, just by try to remind ourselves to do by making a bracha before we eat. And I actually amplify the blessing I received from that food. It's the same with all those little blessings in my life that wouldn't have been there before COVID. By noticing them and appreciating them, I can actually amplify the degree to which they are a blessing. I'd like to actually challenge all of us right now this year that every time we find ourselves complaining or lamenting something that's hard during COVID, and I don't want to say that we shouldn't do that. This is a hard time we're living through, and it's legitimate to complain, and it's legitimate to experience that as a hardship. But I think it's also legitimate to every time we notice ourselves doing that, like really, really feeling the hardship of this, to take a moment and remind ourselves of one thing that's good that I've experienced because of COVID-19, but I wouldn't have experienced without it, and to name it out loud and to thank God for it. And that doesn't take away the experience of suffering, the experience of inconvenience and discomfort and disappointment and sadness. But what it does is mix that experience with an experience of appreciation and gratitude and blessing. Our sages taught us that we are obligated to bless God for the bad as well as for the good. And maybe that's because within every bad thing, there is something positive within that. We don't have to pretend that the bad part isn't there, that there isn't suffering, that there isn't sorrow, that there isn't inconvenience, that we're not bothered. But if we practice looking for that good, noticing it, and appreciating it, it sweetens the curse and can make our experience of it into a blessing. I want to bless us all this year that on Shemini Atzeret tomorrow, as we pray for rain, and we pray that our God send rain as a blessing and not as a curse, that we also that we also are blessed by God with the strength and the wisdom to notice all the blessings in our lives that come in the midst of things that seem to be curses, like rain, which is an inconvenience to travelers and makes life difficult and uncomfortable, but is necessary to sustain life. And that we, by giving thanks for those blessings and working to protect ourselves and others from the curses of every rainstorm that comes our way, we can truly transform this curse into a blessing, minimizing the curse and amplifying the blessing, and make this year, against all odds, truly a year of blessing like the best years. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, and may we receive a rain that is a blessing and not a curse this year.